Hey, and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits, guys. Thank you so much for being here as we're going to do our first mock draft of the 2019 fantasy season as we're heading into this year, guys. I'm so excited. These mock drafts are really fun to do. Now, you probably noticed we're a little bit late to the party. We're probably one of the last fantasy channels to do a mock draft, and really, we've just simply waited. We like to draft late. We like to draft late in the preseason, and we like to do our mock drafts late, simply because things change so much that we want to have the most accurate information. But now, we're really hopping on that bandwagon. Let's have some fun. We're going to go through. We're actually going to break down, so I guess kind of the process for this video is first I'm going to give you a little bit of information so you can understand the league scoring and stuff like that. And then boom, we're going to go through pick by pick for the first 10 picks and explain to you our philosophy behind those selections. And then we're going to look at our roster as a whole, including some of the picks we didn't have time to discuss in depth. And then we're actually going to look at, we'll put up the entire draft board as a whole so you can see every team and every selection in order. That's going to be fun. Make sure to stick around for that because that really right there will show you the flow of the draft, which I think is probably the most important thing to understand when you head into your draft, and probably the most important part of doing mock drafts is really helping get yourself a bit of just an understanding of the flow and where players are going. But before we get started, of course, I got to give you a little bit of background on this. So it is a full point PPR league. That's important. We decided to do that for our first mock draft because PPR leagues have actually become the most popular fantasy leagues, and so I think that's almost the new standard. As well as it is a snake draft. Well, me and Rob, whatever league that we're in, we always do snake drafts except for one, but that has to do with it's a keeper league, and so we like to boost players who struggle to catch up to those who are doing better. But anyway, so it'll be a snake draft, and we actually have the third overall pick in the first round. That means we're going to have a late pick in the second round. Typically, we like to be later in the first round, but in this case, we ended up having it work out that way. Now, one thing I want to say to you guys is that Rob will not be in this video, and while that's unfortunate, I know a lot of you guys really like him. Many of you probably even prefer him. After all, he taught me everything that I know and probably has a lot more to teach me about fantasy. But don't fret. A lot of this is from Rob. In fact, this was the mock draft that Rob did and said, hey, this is the one we want to do for this video, and a lot of the research and the background is from Rob. So I'll be quite honest, a big portion of what I'm doing is just here to tell you what he already did. But anyways, let's get into it right now. Let's talk about our first pick and, of course, the reasoning behind it. I'm really excited, and I think this was actually a really interesting draft. All right, so here we are, third pick in the first round, and the first player to go was, of course, Saquon Barkley, and then it was Ezekiel Elliott. Those are the only two guys off the board, so we've got a choice between a lot of guys. We could go with Todd Gurley still, we could go with Alvin Kamara, we could go with Christian McCaffrey. In the end, we went with Christian McCaffrey. For starters, it's a PPR league. It's a full-point PPR league, and in fact, Christian McCaffrey finished first among all running backs in PPR leagues last year. That right there is huge. In fact, it's almost surprising to see him not go second. I completely understand, and to be honest, I would take Barkley number one, but I'm surprised that Elliott managed to squeak his way in there at number two. That will happen in some leagues. That will happen in some leagues where just because you think a guy should be number two or number three, he's going to fall, he's going to shift, players are going to take it ahead of him. That's something that happens in all leagues, and knowing the people you're drafting with can really help. But we absolutely love this pick. Like I said, in 2018, he's insane. He was the number one PPR running back. He broke an NFL record for most catches by a running back. He had 107 catches last year. That is 107 extra points just for catching the freaking ball. I don't know about you guys, but catching a football doesn't seem that hard. But anyways, it's a guy who had almost 2,000, not all-purpose yards, 2,000 total yards. That is just his catching and his rushing and his receiving. Then he had 13 touchdowns. He was extremely productive. Now, there is two concerns, and maybe this first concern is the reason that he falls in some leagues, and that is Cam Newton's injury and the fact that while Cam Newton is not playing and while Cam Newton is not 100%, that Christian McCaffrey is probably going to face some extra 8-man boxes and some extra pressure. What this is going to mean is more carries and less efficiency. I don't think this is going to hurt his numbers, but it may hurt his durability a little bit because he's going to get a lot of extra carries and a lot tougher carries during that time frame, but I don't think it's going to hurt his fantasy numbers for this season. Now, on to the other question, right, of the two. The other one was durability. This is a guy who's known coming in the NFL being a guy who's a bit too small. Right? The guy who's just a little bit undersized, the guy who they were just kind of concerned about. However, he goes from college into the NFL, and in that off season, he put on some weight. And actually, he put on a lot of weight between last season, 2018, and this 2019 season. You can see in this picture that we used here on the side, he looks big. Like, this is a big boy. If you guys don't know who David Boston is, look him up. He's got a little bit of David Boston syndrome. Doesn't seem like he can stay out of the weight room, which again is going to bode well for him this season. Maybe not long term, but that's good news. And I think he fits here at a number 2 and number 3. I don't think he should fall below number 4. And in a lot of leagues, like I said earlier, we'd love to be later. We'd love to draft 7, 8, 9 in that range. But actually, in this case, I was really happy to be in at number 3. This year, I think Elliott and I think Barkley and I think that McCaffrey set themselves apart as easily the top 3 backs, with Alvin Kamara, having to compete with Latavius Murray and now Cook and, of course, Michael Thomas and just all the targets in that offense. And then Gurley, who's having some serious injury issues. He's starting to scare a lot of people, and he's really scaring me. He definitely should be maybe not completely avoided, but he should fall in the first round for sure. But that's why we took Christian McCaffrey at this pick. I absolutely love this pick. Now, I want to take a second to say, guys, drop a comment down below for every pick we make, for every player that we make. If you want to say, hey, I like this pick, I don't like this pick, tell us why. Let's talk about it. Let's dive in deeper and figure out what we can do better to prepare ourselves for this draft. The other thing is we do a lot of mock drafts, but a lot of my mock drafts look very similar because I follow my same strategies and I follow my same preferences on players and beliefs and thoughts. So what I want to see you guys do, and I really mean this, if you're watching this video, like it, share it, subscribe, all that. But what I really want you guys to go out, do a mock draft, and drop it in the comments below. Let's talk about it. I want to see what rosters you guys are putting together and why. I think that's really important. But let's move on now. Let's get back to it. That was Christian McCaffrey, our first round pick. Now we'll bounce to a late second round pick, and we'll talk about a guy who actually seemed to fall a little bit further than I expected, and kind of how excited I was that he got there. All right, guys, so here we come late in the second round, and a guy like Antonio Brown is still out there. This is a guy we absolutely had to take. We've locked up a top-level number 1 running back in Christian McCaffrey that fits the scoring, and now we're looking, and the question was, do we get another running back? Do we lock that down? Do we maybe want to get a tight end? Right? Maybe we want to go out and grab like a Travis Kelce or a player like that in this sort of range. No, in this situation, we got to take Antonio Brown. Well, many people are a little bit hesitant because of his switch to playing in Oakland, and I know that that's not quite as ideal of a situation as he was playing in Pittsburgh. I don't think he needs to be quite what he was in Pittsburgh to have value as a late second round pick. Let's put it this way. Last year he finished second in wide receiver scoring in standard leagues, and he finished third in wide receiver scoring in PPR leagues. That was despite being alongside Juju Smith-Schuster, who had over 100 targets and like 1,500 yards. This guy, and Antonio Brown, managed to have 15 touchdowns last season. The fact of the matter is he doesn't need 15. He needs 10, 11, or 12 in a 1,000-yard season to be taken where he's taken. He's actually the seventh wide receiver off the board in this mock draft, and it astounds me that a guy like Julio Jones, a guy like Mike Evans are being taken ahead of him. While those are great wide receivers, I love Antonio Brown, and I love his situation. Last year, Derek Carr had 0 weapons. He had absolutely none, and yet he was still able to have the second highest quarterback rating of his career. And so I think this bodes very well. While he is 30 years old going into this season, age is not a problem. Wide receivers, and you can see it, you can look at timeline of wideouts, go basically by their year by year, by their age, and see 30 years old is not old for a wide receiver. It's just not. It's one of those things where he's not necessarily peak, right? I think he's starting to maybe come down from his peak, where I don't think he's going to have an 1,800-yard season with 20 touchdowns or whatever. You know, this is a guy who's 6 consecutive seasons with over 100 catches and 1,000 yards, and with 4 times he had over double-digit touchdowns. The fact of the matter is we're lucky to have a guy like this fall. Now, I'll say this. While I say we're lucky to have him fall to this place, it doesn't surprise me. This is actually happening a lot according to ADP. People are simply uncomfortable with him, and we're going to scoop him up and say thank you for waiting. There are a lot of players who went ahead of him who simply shouldn't, but we'll get to that later. Again, at the end, you'll be able to have a chance to look at every single pick by every single team. If you're listening to this video on our podcast, unfortunately, you won't be able to see it, right? There's no visuals, but if you want to hop on over to the YouTube channel and click on this video on our YouTube, then you'll be able to see it because I won't take the time to list off all the picks. That's just too much. That's too much and not worth our time. Let's move on now to our early third round pick because this was maybe the most interesting pick of the draft, something that I was somewhat surprised to see, but very excited about. I was happy about the Christian McCaffrey pick, but it made sense. I was happy about the Antonio Brown pick, but it happens a lot for him to fall to that point. But this is where I was actually somewhat surprised, and so we'll talk about that in a second though, but let's move on and get to the next guy. All right, so here we are with the third pick in the third round, and we lucked out and we got George Kittle. I think that's an absolutely great pick. Now, I want to talk to you about a few things as we do this because I think there's going to be some people who say he won't be there in the third round. And I give a few things of pushback. One, at this channel, we love taking tight ends. I'm a guy who'll take a tight end mid to late second round so I can get a Kelsey or get a Kittle or get a Ertz. But a lot of people aren't that way. A lot of people are seriously not that way because there are so few elite tight ends. Most people go into a draft assuming they're not going to get one and don't take one. Tight ends are typically taken in the third to the fourth round, so it's not unrealistic for him to be here. Here's why I'm saying that, because this was a weird draft. And there are always those weird anomalies where you're like, right, where you're taking a mock draft and you're like, this can't be a very accurate mock draft because of that weird pick. And I don't think that's the case. When the mock draft makes a dumb pick, it's actually doing something smart. Right? It's doing something very smart, which is predicting that no matter what your league that you're in, I don't care how competitive a league you're in, you get some idiot who will do something dumb, and he'll be taking Randall Cobb in the first round, and you don't know why, but he thinks he's some genius or something. And so I wanted to mention that because for some reason, O.J. Howard was taken before George Kittle in this draft. And again, well, hands down, George Kittle's the better fantasy tight end. O.J. Howard does have some fantasy value. A lot of people are calling him a sleeper. Definitely not this much of a sleeper, but so that wouldn't happen. But like I said, a guy like O.J. Howard would be taken later, not George Kittle would be taken earlier. So you can kind of understand the way that or the way that we can explain that. That's not necessarily the most realistic thing in the world, but again, we would say that was just too early for O.J. Howard and not that it was too late for Kittle. And then again, as well as the fact that, like I said, people make stupid mistakes. And so you have to be willing to capitalize on those mistakes. This is an easy mistake to capitalize on, but you get the point. It's not unrealistic. Something like this will happen in every draft you're in. Not this specific thing, but something like this. It happens every freaking year. Last year I took who was it? Kareem Hunt with the last pick in the first round in a 14-team league. If it weren't for the suspension, that would have been a steal. Now, I made up for it just fine, but you get the point. People make mistakes and they don't draft well. Let's get over that now. Let's move on. This guy was insane. He set the record for most receiving yards by a tight end last season. He was actually the number 2 fantasy tight end in standard scoring leagues last year. He was insane. We talked about him coming out of a rookie year. His rookie year, he had over 500 receiving yards. That's actually pretty good for a tight end. And we talked about how much we liked him. Rob particularly, I got to give him credit. He loved this guy. I mean, he just talked about his metrics and his coaching and his playing on the field and all sorts of things. And it's not too surprising for a guy who had insane metrics and physical capability and really in a team that needed him to be good. One thing to note is, yes, we have him ranked behind Travis Kelce is our number 2 fantasy tight end. That's nothing against Zach Ertz. The reason that we have that is because Dallas Goedert is there in Philadelphia as well, and he's going to steal a lot of catches away. But anyways, I don't think we need to waste too much time on this pick. This was an obvious selection. I can't believe that we were able to get one of the 3 best running backs in the league, probably the 2nd best running back, and then we were able to come around and sweep up Antonio Brown late and get a tier 1 wide receiver, and then come back around a second later and get the 2nd best tight end. This draft is coming together super well. However, I wanted to say something before we move on, because I wanted to let you guys know we've done a lot of mock drafts. I enjoy mock drafts. I do it for fun. It's just like cathartic. You just lay down and do a mock draft after you've eaten dinner and you just don't want to move and you want to lay on the couch. But anyway, so we do that. We did not pick. This was not like, oh, our best draft or we got the most lucky breaks and we put together the best roster. These 3 picks have gone very well. Some of our picks later on aren't as great as we'd like them to be. Actually, the reason we did this was for 2 reasons. One, it followed a lot of our philosophies. right? We're waiting on a quarterback. We like to take a tight end early. We're able to pick some players that we can actually say to you guys we like them. We hate in leagues trying to do this thing and tell you that we took this guy, but really we weren't a huge fan of him. And so all this bodes well, but it wasn't because this was our best draft. It was one because this was our amazing situation. And then finally, you've noticed, we've only taken one running back so far. This is a league where we actually wait quite a bit on our second running back, and our running back situation isn't as good as it'd like to be. So seriously, keep watching, because I think this is a really curious situation where we're finally sitting down and talking with you guys and giving you a mock draft example of what the heck do I do when I don't get a solid number 2 running back. Again, our solution, our answer isn't perfect, but it is a really great way to attack this situation. But again, Kittle, 3rd round, what a great pick, what an easy pick. Let's move on to our next guy. All right, so here we are late in the 4th round, and we got Cooper Kupp, and I love Cooper Kupp at this pick. Some people are going to shy away from him because of his injury last year, and I'm going to address this up front. His injury is a bit scary. But let's stop, because I think we all know that. Because I think if you're watching this channel, I trust you guys. You guys are smart. I don't know if I've ever seen, except a few people on this channel who are really dumb. I've seen a couple of them out there, but I'm going to talk to the majority here who's smart enough to recognize that his injury is a concern, but it's not a major concern. He is recovering. He's looking fine. Let's talk about the good and why we like him at this pick. We don't love him. We don't adore him. This isn't a perfect pick, but this is a good pick, and it's a great late 4th round selection. So first off, we've got to talk about it. Coming out of college, I loved him, and I was not surprised at all when he had a good rookie year and a good second year. He very much impressed. He is the best wide receiver on that team, ahead of Brandon Cook, ahead of Robert Woods. He's better than any tight end that they have. He is the best receiving target out there. He is Jared Goff's safety blanket. He's his number 1 target. Those guys are best buds. I wouldn't be surprised if they're best men in each other's weddings or whatever. I mean, seriously, those guys are so tight on the field. They're just the connection that they have is huge. And the production is absolutely there. Last season, before getting injured, Cooper Kupp was on pace for 80 catches, over 1,100 yards, and 12 touchdowns, and that is absolutely impressive. The problem is, of those games that he played, that was his pace. If you remove the games where he was injured, right, where he didn't play healthy, or he only played a quarter or 2 quarters because he got hurt and then missed the half, right? So when you take he played 6 full games. When you take those 6 complete games where he was healthy and played the entire game, he was actually on pace for 93 catches, 1,400 yards, and 16 touchdowns. He is a difference maker. This is a guy who finished 9th in PPR scoring for wide receivers last year. He is a top 10 fantasy wideout when healthy. Now, I don't know if he's going to be 100% healthy this year, but he is easily a top 15. I'm still saying that he's a top 20 for sure. He's a top 15, and maybe he surprises us and he is a top 10. Maybe he recovers from injury a little bit faster than we expected. Again, when he's healthy, this guy's close to 100 catches. This guy's close to 1,500 yards. This guy's got 16 touchdowns. This guy's insane. In fact, I'm going to go so far to say as if Todd Gurley is still struggling from his injury, if he is playing this season like he was playing at the end of last season, then hands down Cooper Kupp is the best player on that offense and the number 1 weapon and the number 1 target. I absolutely love him in this spot. The injury is a bit of a concern, but for a late 4th round pick who's going to be top 20, probably top 15, maybe top 10, I love it. I love it. I love it. In fact, Jared Goff was throwing almost 1 less touchdown per game after Cooper Kupp left than when he was playing. That makes sense. He was on pace for 16 touchdowns. That's 1 touchdown a game. He's a difference maker. I mean, if you're a quarterback, your fantasy quarterback in your league could get you 1 additional touchdown every single game of the season, you'd take it. You'd be excited. You'd be posting and bragging about it, and you'd have lots of fun. It'd be a great time. I love Cooper Kupp at this pick. Again, I love Cooper Kupp as a player. I love him as a fantasy value. We only like this pick because of the injury concern. If it weren't for the injury concern, he wouldn't even be here for us to take it this time. But this is another good pick. And for a league where we have to start 3 wide receivers, it's really good to get this second one out of the way and secure that position. So let's move on to the next guy. All right, so now here, early in the 5th round, Rob wanted to take Allen Robinson. First thing I'm going to say is a lot of people aren't going to understand this pick. So I want to read off a quote from him. Right, he's not here, but I want to speak for him. He wanted me to say this, and so here we go. He just said, personally, I think I could have waited on him and taken him probably later. He would have maybe been there in the next round. He says this, but I still have good, or excuse me, he said, but I still see good backs on the board, some steals and some value picks later on. And he felt the need to go out and grab this guy. He said, I wanted to grab a wide receiver with a wide receiver 1 potential. Right? Rob fully thinks this, and I agree with him. After his research, I didn't agree with him when he first told me, but after he presented his argument, I completely believed him that Allen Robinson has the potential to be a wide receiver 1 on fantasy rosters. This guy's insane. According to his ADP, he is the 29th wide receiver taken, but he is, again, easily has that number 1 potential. Let's talk about it. It was just a few years ago, heading into 2016, he was being drafted as a not just a top 10, but a top 5 oftentimes fantasy wide receiver heading into that season. Because in 2015, he was insane. He had 1,400 yards and 15 touchdowns that year. He looked elite. He looked next level. He was one of the next guys to come out and be insane, right? We were excited about him. And of course, why not? 15 touchdowns, 1,400 yards is fantastic. But then he just had an average year last year, right? Because of injuries, his whole career got delayed, and then boom, he's out of Jacksonville, and now he's playing for the Bears. A lot of people were disappointed that last year he only had 754 yards and 4 touchdowns. However, he was recovering from an ACL injury. He was learning a new offense with a new coach and a young, inexperienced quarterback. That is a difficult situation to be in. Is a very difficult situation to be in, and in fact those numbers come out as quite impressive when you consider that. He was not even fully able to participate in OTAs or mini camps, which really robbed him of an opportunity to go out there and to practice with the guys and to get some reps, right, and to get some connection with that quarterback so they can really build some repertoire together. But he wasn't able to do that. He missed out on chemistry with his quarterback, and he missed out on time learning in the offense, and he missed out on, honestly, coach's respect. When a guy goes to practice, the coach just wants to use him more in the offense. That sounds obvious, but it's true, and don't forget it. And he really turned it around, guys. He really did. Now, as far as the injury goes, he recovered well last year. We're going to talk about the second half of the season where he played better and proved himself to be fully recovered from that. But I also want to remind you guys, do you know how old he is? Allen Robinson's actually not old. He's actually only 26 years old, which means he's still heading into his prime. He's not even there yet. And with a more experienced coach and a more experienced quarterback and having a full season completely healthy and 100% removed from that ACL tear, I like that. I like that a lot heading into this year. That's going to be great. But final argument for this, the final reason why we had to take him here was that in the last 8 games of the season, he averaged 76 receiving yards a game. Over 16 games, that's 1,200 yards. He also averaged 5 catches per game, so over 16 games, that's 80 catches in a season. 80 catches and 1,200 yards is a great season. He's got a great build at 6'3", 215 pounds. I absolutely love him heading into the season and completely agree with Rob. I didn't at first, but when you start to look at the facts are there, and we love this. Now you're probably wondering, we've been through the first 5 rounds and we only have 1 running back. FFP, that's really unlike you guys. Don't worry, our next pick is a running back, so we're going to get to that right now. All right, so I'm going to be honest right now with you guys. Me and Rob aren't a huge fan of Derrick Henry. We're not a huge fan. A lot of people are hyped on him, saying he's going to have this fantastic season. He's going to be an amazing running back. We're not quite as sold as others are. However, it does bode well that people are sold on him, that people really like him, because he did finish the season as a very good guy, as a very good fantasy back, and he had a very strong second half of the year. However, we don't think he's that great. He fits in this 6th spot because there weren't a lot of running backs left. In fact, he is the 24th running back off the board. That's pretty good for a guy who finished 13th in running back scoring in standard leagues last year. Again, this is a PPR league, but you're talking about a 6th-round pick to secure your 2nd running back when you have an elite wide receiving core, a top-tier running back number 1, and one of the best tight ends in the game, and one of the only guys worth taking early. We've really secured a lot of positions up to this point. So while I do think that our running back 2 situation is lacking, we're going to short up later with some sleepers, with some value picks, and with some players that we do like more, but we wanted to make a safe pick with a guy who finds the end zone in Derrick Henry. Again, he's not this big PPR stud, but at some point he's got to be drafted. He's got to land on some roster. And the way he finished last year, he could surprise some people. If he could finish with 10 touchdowns, he could be worth this 6th round pick. So that's why we took Derrick Henry in this spot. Feel free to go in the comments down below and tell us why we're stupid and why we're an idiot. But again, what we're going to do after this, once we get through these top 10 picks, is we're going to show you our roster as a whole, and then we're going to show you every single pick in order, and you're going to see there was not a lot of better running back options out there. And that's what I think this mock draft is good for, is showing you some options and what your roster will look like if you take advantage of picks and you wait on your running back, or your running back 2, I should say. We would never wait on both running backs, but let's move on. I don't have a lot to say about this, guys, and I don't think anyone does, but maybe you do, and if you do, drop a comment. Here we are. Let's talk about it. David Montgomery. Now, apologies here. You wonder why. I got 2 computers. I'm recording on one, and then I'm over here on the other. So if you're wondering what I'm doing, I've got my research over here. This is a great pick. We like David Montgomery. And in fact, I'm not going to talk about him too much because we just made a video where we talked about the impact that rookie players are going to have. What rookie players are going to have best fantasy seasons, and he cracked that list. He was one of Rob's favorite. David Montgomery as huge fantasy value. In fact, he probably has the 2nd most fantasy value of any rookie running back besides Josh Jacobs, right? Josh Jacobs is number 1. He's got to be number 2. We like him for a lot of reasons. 1, he can shine in a PPR league. 2, he's got this just awesome downhill ability and physical, and we're going to talk about some of the things that he can do. And 3, he fits a good system that has a need this season. This is a guy who's known for having great elusiveness and great balance. He's known to have a good work ethic and be a stand-up guy. He's known to be a really hard worker and a mature person, a very productive player. In fact, Coach Nagy came out and said, I'll just read this quote now, says the amount of times that he makes defenders miss in the tackle box, that he extends run with his sheer power and physicality, his tremendous ability to feel when the next guy's coming, and an elite peripheral vision, right? He's just explaining like this is just so much right about this guy. This is a guy who can come in from day one and be a top running back. In fact, that's why we like him here, is because at wide receiver, at quarterback, at tight end, we don't want rookies. Rookies take time to develop and they're not going to have very good seasons. But at running back, you can come in day one and be one of the top tier guys. You can be elite. We saw what Barkley did last year, and we've seen it from other running backs. So we absolutely like this. Now, Tariq Cohen is there, and he is a great pass catching back. But he's simply too small and unproductive. We saw it last year. Last year, they desperately needed a running game to get going. Last year, they were desperately trying to find someone to replace the just lacking Jordan Howard. And they tried to give it to Tariq Cohen, and he wasn't performing, and so they still limited his carries. The fact of the matter, he just wasn't getting the job done. We warned people about this last year, but most people didn't listen. Tariq Cohen is not going to be a number 1 fantasy guy. He's not going to be a number 1 running back on a roster. He's not going to be the guy, the dude, the man. He just can't fit that role. That's where a guy like David Montgomery comes in, and I think he much better fits that offense. He played last year for Iowa, for the Cyclones there, Iowa State. He was very productive. He played behind one of the league's better offensive lines, yes, but he also made that offensive line look so good, and so I'm really excited to see what we can do this year with a coach that's getting more mature. I think he is a solid handcuff player. What I mean by that is he's a number 1. I think he's generally the number 1 running back there in Chicago, but later on we're going to handcuff him with Mike Davis. This is a much later on pick, but we're going to get that handcuff, and we're going to ensure whoever's the back in Chicago is on our fantasy roster because they're going to have some good numbers. So don't absolutely love this pick. Again, we're starting to get late, in the 7th round. A late 7th round pick is not ideal. It's not amazing. But actually, excuse me, I believe it's an early 7th round pick. But the fact of the matter is, we're getting late, and the options are not there. There aren't some great selections. So let's move on to the next one. All right, so here we come, Christian Kirk. I think Christian Kirk is a good first bench. So this is a guy who's going to be on our bench, and he's very talented, right? He had 32 catches, almost 600 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He did that in just 12 games played, and he did that with a brutal quarterback situation. Josh Rosen, I'm sorry if you're watching this, but you're a bad quarterback, and you hurt the fantasy value of this player. I mean, his college numbers, his combine numbers, his metrics, what we know that he can do physically and his talent is off the charts. And he still had a solid rookie season despite being held back by Rosen. This year, he gets an athletic quarterback who is rated as having a top 5 arm strength, despite having not even played a single game. That's insane. That's huge. And he's got good legs. That bodes very well. That means if the very worst thing that happens, Kyler Murray can snap the ball and he can run around. He can do a little dance in the backfield for about 35 seconds and just wait for Christian Kirk to get downfield and he'll just chuck it, right? Like, that's the worst thing that happens. Kirk will have better value this year than last year. So this is a good, solid pick. It's not an amazing pick, but for a bench wide receiver, he has huge value. Here we come, Carson Wentz, excuse me, guys. Carson Wentz is an awesome pick. We waited till round 9 to take our quarterback. While this was a mock draft where we waited on our secondary running back, and that was fine, we're uncomfortable with that. We had to stick to our philosophy and make up for some of that by getting good other positions, and so we had to wait on our quarterback, and we're fine with that. Round 9 is actually not that late when you think about it. Other talented and good fantasy options were out there. Ben Roethlisberger, who finished 3rd or 4th last year, Phillip Rivers, Kirk Cousins, who threw 30 touchdowns, Mitchell Trubisky, who was, I believe, top 12. There's some talented guys out there. 2017, he was hands down going to be MVP before getting hurt. He was on pace for 41 touchdown passes before he got hurt. They were 10-1 heading into week 13 before he tore his ACL. He was the man. He was the show. It was the Carson Wentz machine, and he was rolling. And so that's huge. Now, he's recovering from surgery, and of course, we've got some uncomfortableness with his health and a lot of stuff going on, but he's actually still pretty young. He's only 26 years old, and that bodes very well. Statistically, metrics, sabermetrics, in-depth stats, and a lot of research, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on, have proven that quarterbacks don't hit their peak, they don't hit their prime, and they don't play as well as they can play until they're after 28 years old. That position takes a level of maturity that cannot be reached by a 25-year-old who's just been in the league for a few years. There's simply too much to learn. While we like that they're a passing offense, he's got 2 good tight ends, he's got some good wideouts, he's got a good offensive line, and he bodes well from a not great running back situation where they can't run the ball all day even if they wanted to. We absolutely like him. Again, this is a guy who averages 2.25 passing touchdowns per game over the last 2 seasons. Those numbers are insane when you project it out over the whole year. And really, you can see that it's him who's doing it. It's not just his wide receivers. In fact, last season he was 4th in the NFL in adjusted completion percentage. That accounts for drop passes, throwaways because the offensive line, spiked balls, batted passes, and passes where the quarterback was hit while throwing the ball. He is just simply a good, accurate thrower, and I love him. This is a solid pick right here. Let's move on to our last selection. We're going to talk about the defense that we picked, and then we'll move on, and we're not going to talk about every single player. We're just going to look at things as a whole. And boom, here we are, guys. Pick number 10, we took the Minnesota Vikings defense. Now, there isn't a lot that goes into that pick, but we start to reach a point where you have to take a defense or a kicker. Maybe not quite yet, but I'll tell you why. Some people like to wait, and I love the idea of streaming a defense or a kicker, but I do not love the idea of streaming both a defense and a kicker. So the question we had to ask ourselves was, what were we going to stream? And in this particular mock draft, we decided we would stream the kicker, which actually later on we ended up getting a good deal on the kicker. We got Greg Zuerlein, which is a steal. But it was nice to get a top 5 fantasy defense and to not have to worry about it. There are other sleepers on the board. We thrive in the last few rounds of the draft because of countless research that we do. The Minnesota Vikings defense, they're a good pick. They're a good pick in this spot. They're not an amazing pick, and no, this isn't a hometown pick despite the hat that I'm wearing and the fact that I like the Vikes. There were already some good defenses gone, and we were able to get one of the last few ones before we were just going to scrap it and say, all right, stream week to week, right? So that's it right there. Those are our top 10 picks. Now let's get into the big overview. Let's talk about our roster as a whole. So here we are. You can see at quarterback Carson Wentz. We love that pick. Christian McCaffrey, an elite number 1 running back. While we lack at the number 2 running back, currently being either Montgomery or Derrick Henry, we went out and took some other guys, right? We took LaShawn McCoy. That was a much later pick. I believe that was an 11th round pick, and that was a nice steal. We handcuffed with Davis. We didn't handcuff, but we went out and took back up Ito Smith, who could definitely have some value this year, depending on whether or not Freeman can stay healthy because Coleman is now gone, right? And so if we're aggressive, we always say that good teams in championships, playoffs, they're won. Championships are won in free agency, in trades, and in start sit. So if we stick to those, really that philosophy, and we do that well, guys, if we're smart in free agency, if we make good trades, if we're being very diligent to make the proper start sits that we need to make every week, we can make up for a weak RB2. Especially because I looked through this draft, we probably have the best wide receiving core. Antonio Brown and Cooper Kupp. Then we got guys like Christian Kirk, Allen Robinson. We got we also have John Brown on the bench. I think there's an absolutely great situation of guys right there. And then, of course, we have tight end George Kittle. That's awesome, the number 2 best tight end. We've got a top 5 defense and a probably top 3 kicker. I'm not too intense on my kicker rankings, who really is, but I think this is all around a great roster. So let's pause for a second. Let's just go to the next part. Let's just finish this off by looking at the draft as a whole. All right, here we are, guys. I'm not going to say too much. Feel free to pause the video and just look at every pick if you want. I think this is a fairly normal draft. There are, of course, in every draft, a few anomalies, but anomalies are part of the norm. I know that sounds weird, but if you've been a part of fantasy for enough, you know that stupid, weird picks happen every year, and there's really no arguing. It just happens for whatever reason, and so you can get a look at that. I absolutely like the flow of our draft and really how we're able to recover from that missing running back position and really shore up our other spots. But again, those are the first 7 rounds. Now I'm going to click to the next slide so you can see the rest of the draft. All right, guys, feel free to take as much time as you want to pause this and to look at that. I have nothing more to say. Thank you so much for watching. Drop a comment down below. Tell us why we're smart. Tell us why we're dumb. Complain that Rob wasn't here. I don't even care what you say. Let's just get some interaction, guys. We're getting into fantasy season. But importantly, drop a comment down below of your mock draft. I want to see what other people are doing. I'm so curious, and I'm tired of my own opinions sometimes, I swear. I think my opinions are pretty good. I think they're pretty smart and well supported, but I love to hear from you guys. You guys have a great day, and God bless.